As your host today, I am Bajam Santa, Senior Communications Manager for the Faurecia Foundation, and I want to welcome you all to this exciting webinar with two amazing and distinguished guests. As the first person for this conversation, we have His Excellency Richard Bale, who is going to be talking with Dr. Dennis Faurecia, who is the co-chair of the Faurecia Foundation. Dr. Dennis is going to be moderating and facilitating this conversation on the relations between Cameroon and Canada. Dr. Dennis and His Excellency Richard Bale, welcome to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Santa, for that introduction, and welcome to Your Excellency Richard Bale one more time for honoring us and joining the Faurecia Foundation and Capital Policy Institute. It's indeed our great honor to be hosting you here again. Now, for this very important conversation on Canada-Cameroon relations and where we are today, so it's a great honor. Now, for all the audience joining us, just a quick, brief introduction on His Excellency Richard Bale. Dr. Ambassador Bale obtained his bachelor's in arts in 1977 from the University of British Columbia and another BA with honors from Laval University in 81. He had an MA from Carleton in 88 and then worked with Kuso International in northern Nigeria from 81 to 83 before joining the Department of External Affairs in 86. At headquarters, he worked in various positions, including in Asian and North American affairs. While he was overseas, he served in both trade and development positions in Stockholm, in Moscow, and also as Senior Trade Commissioner in Islamabad, as well as Manila, Taipei, and Jakarta. He then served as Consul General in Mumbai, India, from 2013 to 2015, and in Ho Chi Minh City from 2015 to 2017. Ambassador Bale then came to Cameroon in 2019, where he took up his position. So, hi, Bale, it is indeed a great honor for us to have you here, and thank you again for honoring us.
My pleasure to be here, and the timing of this invitation from the Nkafu Pali Institute is probably good because I've been here for 18 months, so I've had enough time to, I think, develop a fairly good sense of Canada's presence in Cameroon and our past. And it's not so late in my assignment that I'm checking out and thinking about the next one. So good timing.
Thank you, Ambassador Bell. Now, for us to start this conversation, Canada and Cameroon have had diplomatic relations since 1962 or so. Can we start by you giving us really a global assessment of this relationship? Where are we today?
I guess when you come here in my position, the thing that constantly strikes you is, well, two things constantly strike you. One is the depth of goodwill that there is towards Canada. And this is partly because of our history here. As you know, there were missionaries principally from Quebec and New Brunswick, French-speaking missionaries who came to Cameroon in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and devoted, most of their adult lives to working here often in fairly remote regions. And the last of those are actually just starting to leave now. There were two who left last week after having spent 50 years in Cameroon. That was followed by, we used to have, until 2012, I think it was, we had a bilateral development assistance program here in Cameroon. And that's clearly left a strong legacy. And it's not uncommon that people will say to me, oh, Canada did this here, Canada did that here. I was in Maroa recently, and I was told that Canada transformed the onion sector in Maroa. I had no idea. This morning, I was at an event, and I met the rector of Université Undi 1, and he was telling me about the Canadian involvement in the establishment of both the education faculty and I think the health faculty it was there. And wherever you go, you come across this legacy, which has almost invariably has left people with a very good impression. Now of course, there are these immigration ties. So many Cameroonian students choose to study in Canada. Some of them stay. Lots of people have relatives in Canada, and that it seems that the Cameroonian experience in Canada is a very positive one, and so that feeds back to us here. The second thing, of course, is the similarities between Canada and Cameroon, and essentially that's the bilingualism and the two language communities where one is a majority and one is a minority, and in both of our countries that has created both, on the one hand, challenges, but it also creates a kind of a richness, and as a Canadian here, you feel very comfortable and actually privileged to be living in one of the few other French-English bilingual countries in the world. So this overall framework of the relationship is a very positive one. And I guess in our government to government relationships, that goodwill and that positiveness, that's still there. We have this other, it's completely coincidental, but alphabetically Canada and Cameroon are next to one another, and so we always sit next to one another in multilateral settings, whether it's the UN and of course we're in the Commonwealth and La Francophonie and any number of meetings. And it's very common that government officials will comment to me on that. And of course, if you're sitting next to somebody at a conference for 3 days, you kind of get to know them and you ask them about their country. And so there's that. I mean, it's random, but it ends up being real. So that's on the government side, but on the people side, we have these strong links with students and immigrants. And then we have, I think it's fair to say that we've built quite strong relationships with civil society. And of course, civil society is a very important element in everybody's countries. And here in Cameroon, there's a very vibrant and active civil society. And so we feel that, I mean, you just have the feeling from pretty much everybody you meet that it's a good relationship.
No, so thank you very much for that, Ambassador Bale. Now, as you alluded to earlier, the Canadian government, your government, in 2017 adopted the Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy, which went into effect shortly after that. Now, can you talk to us a little bit about some of the pillars or hallmarks of that really undergird this policy?
That was a very clear decision on the part of our current government, the Liberal government, which was elected in 2015. And back then, when Prime Minister Trudeau appointed his first cabinet, he very deliberately appointed half the ministers women and half the ministers men. And when he's very famously was asked, Prime Minister, why did you do that? And he answered, because it's 2015. In other words, because it's time. And I guess that we have a very strong feeling that it is time for everybody to implement a gender equal approach in everything that they do. And we believe in development terms that the most transformative things that a thing that a country can do is to fully utilize the capacity of the 50% or more of its population that is female. So we put a very strong emphasis on gender equality. We put a very strong emphasis on girls' education. We put a very strong emphasis on women's health, and you see that reflected in what Canada does in Cameroon. For example, as I said, we no longer have a bilateral assistance program here, but we still do we still fund a lot of projects through various windows. And we have one, for example, we have one very big project where we're funding Plan Cameroon on it's more than a girls' education project. It's kind of a when I say girls, this is, girls are between 15 to 24. It's education, it's livelihood, empowerment outside of Garoua, so in the north, which is a relatively conservative environment. And the project is taken a very bottom-up approach where we ask, or Plan asks the girls what they need. So it's and the fact of it being bottom-up is fairly revolutionary in a way, simple but revolutionary. In another example, and this is very much on the multilateral level, this week in Geneva at the Human Rights Commission, Canada is sponsoring, as it does every 2 years, sponsoring a resolution on violence against women and girls. Specifically this year, it's violence against women and girls with disabilities. So those are a couple of examples. One, which is a kind of at the lofty multilateral level, and another which is very much at the nuts and bolts field level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thank you for that, Ambassador. Now, quick dive. Let's dive a little bit in some of the various areas. We're starting by the emphasis on inclusive governance, and later on humanitarian assistance. If we were to look at inclusive governance and your policy towards inclusive governance, the issue of democracy, the issue of human rights, the issue of good governance in a country like Cameroon is something that all Cameroonians are very much engaged in, and also folks like yourself, bilateral partners, are very much engaged with. Now that you're 2 years in your stay in the country, what is your evaluation of the country regarding these areas, human rights, democracy, governance, and specifically, can you talk about your engagement, the Canadian government's engagement with Cameroonian civil society?
These questions are always it's always a work in progress. You can always do better, and you can say that of Cameroon, and you can say that of Canada. And in Canada, we always strive to do better. At the current time, we're really struggling with the legacy of our treatment of Indigenous peoples, for example. But we try to do that in a forward-looking and open way. And in countries, I mean, this isn't a comment not only with respect to Cameroon, and I'll add, of course, that here we're responsible for, in addition to Cameroon, Chad, CAR, and Gabon, and so although our principal focus is on Cameroon, so in all of those countries we work to support we work to support local actors who are active in these areas. Our principal approach is to work with civil society. I referred to civil society before, and we believe civil society always has an extremely important role to play in reminding the government of the obligations it has undertaken at the international level, of calling it to account if there are shortcomings, in educating the Cameroonian public about not only its rights but also about some of the things that are happening. And with civil society, I'd say we've developed some key partnerships in the area of human rights, of press freedom is another focus of ours, gender equality, and within gender equality, there's all these kind of subdivisions, whether it be child marriage, violence against women, and where we have had a particular focus, and I guess this has become important in Cameroon over the last few years, is in the area of women peace builders, and in all of those areas we believe it is Cameroonian actors who should be taking the lead, and the role of partners such as Canada is to help them do what they do, to strengthen their ability, to strengthen their voice, to to help civil society coordinate better among itself. And we believe that that ultimately is a good thing, ultimately a good thing for the government, but a good thing for the country. Because we don't have a, you'll hear me saying this several times, because we don't have a bilateral assistance program, we don't really have the tools to work directly with the government. That said, occasionally there are projects, and often Cameroon gets included in regional projects that we fund. So, for example, currently, and it's coming to a close now, it's been a project that's run for the last 3-4 years. There's a regional project in which Cameroon is involved, which involves improving governance in the natural resources sector. In concrete terms, that principally means in the mining sector, ensuring that that the government has the ability to collect the revenues that is due to it from activity in the mining sector. And of course, in the mining sector can be a tremendous driver of economic growth, but it can also be a problematic sector. So we believe very strongly that there's a critical role for government to play in the transparent management of that sector, to ensure that the populations receive benefits from it, and that those benefits are not captured by a small group of people only.
Mm-hmm. And so, but Your Excellency, when even without a bilateral cooperation agreement, in your conversations with the Foreign Minister Bale regarding these areas, and your broad engagement with other government actors, what is your recommendation to them, or how does this go?
Yeah, that's it's my experience that the government of Cameroon is quite well intentioned, and so when we have discussions about values and principles, we're pretty much on the same page, and I guess the challenge, as is the case with many countries, is in execution. How are policies and principles and values, how they actually executed on the ground. And that's where sometimes countries like Canada sometimes maybe have some more interesting discussions with the government. But the discussions that we have, I would say, are extremely are very friendly and with a positive tone. Even when we disagree, which we sometimes do, we disagree with a positive tone.
Well, Your Excellency, Canada is very involved with regards to humanitarian assistance in Cameroon. Now, can you touch a little bit on that?
Yeah. So our humanitarian program, it's divided between we work both through multilateral channels and with individual NGOs. So on the multilateral side, typically we provide funding to the World Food Program, to UNHCR, to UNHAS, which is the World Food Program kind of, I guess you'd call it, airline, which and that's part of the kind of the backbone for the entire humanitarian community. People have to be able to get around. So UNHAS runs flights within Cameroon and up to N'Djamena. And on the NGO side, we provide support both in the far north and in the northwest southwest. So in the far north, we provide the funding to a Canadian NGO called Mission Inclusion, which used to be the Fondation Légère. So and it has worked for many years in the through the Catholic Church infrastructure in Maroa, and so that funding goes through the humanitarian arm of the Catholic Church in based out of Maroa, and so a lot of that goes to the Mayasava Mayatanaga the border regions with Nigeria, where there are a lot of both refugees and IDPs, and host communities as well, who have received those refugee and IDP populations. And we try, the partners that we support, we try to ensure that, because one of the other precepts of the Canadian Assistance Program writ large is that we try to help the poorest of the poor. So we look for NGOs who are either working in underserved areas or with underserved populations, or both. In the Northwest Southwest, we're working, we're supporting PLAN, and that's both in the Northwest and in the Southwest. Now, PLAN has very long, very deep roots in the Northwest, and in fact, PLAN Cameroon, PLAN Canada has for many years been a supporter of PLAN Cameroon in the Northwest, and that's not with Government of Canada resources, but with their own resources that they generate independently. Now, of course, there's always a tremendous competition for humanitarian funding when we look at, and here in the region, we provide humanitarian funding in Cameroon, in Chad, and CAR, and of course, other countries all around. And there's just not enough funding to satisfy all the needs. So, so we try to be as strategic as we can, and we do think it's important in Cameroon that we're active in both areas, in the far north and the Northwest Southwest. Even though the nature of the crises in those two regions is very different, the impact on the civilian population is very serious in both cases. Now, I'll say as well that, now I'll just add that the kind of strategically, we, the High Commission, we have a small project fund as well, and one of the things we've used that for is to support, to build capacity among local Cameroonian humanitarian NGOs. And so this kind of ticks two boxes. It's both humanitarian and it ticks the box of our belief in the importance of Cameroon developing its own civil society NGO network.
Yes, very much appreciate that. Now, speaking of the situation in the Northwest and Southwest regions, Your Excellency, you took up your role 3 years into a conflict which is arguably degenerated into a war currently. You have been very forthright in calling for a negotiated solution, for a durable solution to the conflict, and you've highlighted on multiple occasions the humanitarian situation as a worsening as the conflict escalates currently. Now, what is your view of what it would take to really bring this war to an end?
Yeah, I think it would take a leap of faith on both sides. I mean, it's hard for anybody and hard for an outsider to know what's really happening, but we work quite hard to, as to the extent that it's possible, to generate our own independent assessment. And I guess we share the view of many independent observers that the situation is not improving. It wouldn't have been illogical for someone like myself arriving here 18 months ago to think that, well, in 18 months we'll be on what looks like a road to lasting solution, but we don't see evidence of that. And as you noted, Canada has consistently expressed the view that there needs to be a broader and more inclusive dialogue than that which has occurred to date. We recognize that this is it's a problem. It's a Cameroonian problem. It's a problem that has been created by Cameroonians, and so it needs to be a problem that is fixed by Cameroonians. And Cameroonians are smart, capable people, and so we know that Cameroonians are capable of fixing this problem. But sometimes, and especially as a war, the longer a war lasts, the more vested interests develop, the more angry or resentful people on one side or the other can become, the more the conflict degenerates and becomes more complicated. So fixing it doesn't become any easier as time passes. And that's why I say I think it takes a leap of faith. It also takes involvement of multiple parties. I mean, Canada has, we have provided support to, we've provided support to the laying of the groundwork for a dialogue process. And we don't know if a dialogue process could take any number of forms. We are providing support to independent civil society voices who we feel would need to be involved in any meaningful peace negotiation. So we have provided support to women peace builders, to youth, to religious leaders, and we believe that all these communities have a role to play. It's one thing to get a dialogue process going, it's another to make it sustainable and lasting. And I guess this comes back a bit to your original, your early question about Canada's feminist foreign policy. We're very, very strong believers in the women, peace and security agenda internationally. And in Cameroon, we have provided support in a number of different ways to women peace builders from the northwest, from the southwest, from other regions of Cameroon. As you may know, there's been an announcement of a women's peace conference convention at the end of this month. This is where we cannot claim any credit for this happening, or not directly, but I think we can look at it and we see a number of people involved in that who are people that we have worked with and supported. And so even if we can't take credit, we can feel good about it, and we can hope that that process may lead to something, may propose ideas, may create pressures, and may be a way forward that is more acceptable to the parties than other solutions which have been proposed up until now.
Well, thank you, Your Excellency, for that. Now, just as you alluded to earlier, your government has supported the Swiss initiative to help bring towards a dialogue or a negotiation, whatever it leads to, providing significant funding for that and other support. That for sure is to be really commended, and I don't speak for any Cameroonian except myself, but very commended. The issue that many have seen is that one worries whether the initiative is even still alive. There's been no significant engagement that is palpable thus far. Just 2 days ago, there was an in-depth report by the Swedish newspaper L'Automne, and it actually quoted the Prime Minister himself, Chief John Gute, declaring that the Swiss mediation is dead. There are also many reports of discontent within various embassies in Yaoundé regarding what may be described as not sure whether the Swiss initiative is actually alive. As someone, as a government that has been implicated in this, trying to look for a way forward, how does Canada see this initiative going forward? What are the prospects of something of tangible outcomes or outputs even from the process?
I guess I'll say that there have been many reports of the death of the process, none of which have turned out to be fully accurate. I haven't seen the report in the Swiss newspaper. From where we sit, the process is not dead, but it hasn't moved as quickly as we would have hoped. There's been progress that has been achieved. We still view it as it's still really the only option, and therefore the best option that's on the table. But it doesn't have to be the option that is used. And I think in the preparatory work, it's my view that in the preparatory work, we have helped, we have supported the laying of the foundations for a process that could change form, that could involve different players. So I guess I would say Canada remains moderately optimistic without having any illusions. The disappointment is the speed of forward movement, and again, we can only appeal to the to the stakeholders to make an honest assessment of the state of the crisis, which is, you look at the recent reports over the last couple of weeks, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse, and the casualties on both sides. Civilians are suffering, schools are closed, children are suffering, women are suffering, as gender-based violence is a significant problem that isn't talked about enough. There are abuses, frankly, as we all know, on both sides. And so we would just encourage all parties to take a long, hard look at the situation and creatively consider options for moving forward and take that leap of faith. And Canada is certainly willing to support any process that goes forward. Canada has no interest. We don't have, other than in our own country, we don't have any colonial baggage. We don't have huge commercial interests. We view Cameroon as a long-standing friend, and I guess because of this, the commonalities that we have, that we spoke about before, we care about Cameroon's future, and the Northwest-Southwest problem is a problem that Cameroon can fix. That's not necessarily, you can't necessarily say the same thing about the far north. That's more of an external, as you know, more of an external challenge. And so you can't help but thinking that it would make a lot of sense for Cameroon to fix the Northwest-Southwest problem, which is within its powers to do. Not easy, but within its powers to do, in order that it could focus more of its military and security and economic resources on other areas of the country.
Thank you, sir. And I'll just to the audience, I'll just ask you to continue to put your questions on the Q&A section. And Your Excellency, one more question on this. As Cameroon, Canada are really, as you've mentioned before, the only two bilingual countries in both the English and French in both La Francophonie and the Commonwealth. Canada plays a prominent role in the Peace Building Commission of the UN. Canada is a major player in the G7, in the G20. Many wonder if Canada, can or should take a more substantive role in helping bring this conflict to an end.
Yeah, frankly, I think we're already playing a pretty substantive role insofar as, we're one of the principal supporters of the mediation process, which has been, which is on offer, and similarly, I think we're one of the principal supporters of women peace builders in this country and the strengthening of civil society. we do talk with our partners at a multilateral level about many problems, including the challenges that face Cameroon, and we always we would always be prepared, I would say, to take on greater responsibilities if that were welcomed, and if it appeared that would be useful.
Thank you for that. Now, let's focus a little bit before we take some questions from the audience on economic and trade cooperation between Canada and Cameroon. Um, the partnership between both countries is strengthening, and I know that there was a trade partnership that was signed between the government of Canada recently. Can you talk a little bit on this economic and trade cooperation, the way you see it between both countries?
Yeah, okay. So one of the, I mean, as I said, Canada doesn't have any huge interests in Cameroon. Like everybody, we have certain commercial interests, but they're not dominant. That said,
Nous
Cameroon, of
entretenons
course,
beaucoup de rapports avec des pays, et évidemment le Cameroun.
That said, of course, Cameroon is the strongest economy in the Central African region, the countries that we're responsible for. And there are certain sectors that we have a certain history commercially in the country, whether it be in the energy sector or the forestry sector or the aerospace sector, the rail sector. A lot of those things in the education sector, a lot of those relationships driven out of the assistance program, but nonetheless with Canadian companies very proactive as well. And I'll say, and I'm contradicting myself a little bit, I've said that we don't have any huge commercial interest, but I have been struck and positively surprised by the number of Canadian companies active here and the diversity of their interests. Now, I'd say the principal sector for Canada, and this it's kind of commercial and it's kind of something else, and that's the education sector. There are, currently there's over 2,000 Cameroonian students studying in Canada, and you can look at that as a commercial activity in the sense that they come to Canada, they pay their tuition fees. There's an economic impact from the money that they spend there. And certainly Canada looks at international students as, among other things, as having a very significant commercial impact. Now, what I think many people don't know is that in sub-Saharan Africa, after Nigeria, which has a population, I don't know, 10 times bigger than Cameroon, after Nigeria, Cameroon is the second largest source of students to Canada, from sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, it's both Francophone students and Anglophone students. And they're studying in Anglophone institutions and Francophone institutions. So every year, I mean, this is pre-COVID, every year we would organize what we called an Salon Edu-Canada, and we'd have something like 25 Canadian institutions coming here, a mixture of Anglophone, Francophone, universities, colleges, high schools, and looking to attract students at all levels, up to the doctorate level. And it's the only, so we organize within West and Central Africa, we organize 2 tours, one Anglophone and one Francophone. And Cameroon is the only country where both tours come. And again, that's kind of, it's emphasizing this kind of unique character of Cameroon, but also the unique relationship that we have between the 2 countries. So education is very important. And of course, there's other dimensions to that. Some Cameroonians stay there, some Cameroonians come back here with not only having studied, but having worked in Canada, and they bring those skills to the Cameroonian economy. And it's a very valuable two-way flow. Surprisingly, and this was really surprising to me, we're very strong in the infrastructure sector here, and I think it's a truism that Canadian construction companies cannot thrive overseas because they will always be beaten out by the Chinese, by the this, by the that. And yet here in Cameroon, we have this one company from Montreal, McGill, that has worked on the reconstruction of the stadium in Douala, Bapanda, now on the Olembe in Yaoundé, and is starting a third infrastructure project in La Pénétrante Est in Douala. And why are they able to compete here? It's because they deliver their projects on time and on budget. And that's actually a very, very valuable comparative advantage. So we're doing very well in that sector that we normally would not expect to. Other sectors, actually, and this is something I think nobody knows. So something like 75% of our actual exports to Cameroon is wheat. So whenever if you eat pasta or you eat bread in Cameroon, there's a pretty good chance part of the wheat that went into that product is from Canada, because our wheat tends to be it's higher quality, it's higher protein, and so manufacturers like to add that, whether it's to pasta or to flour or whatever. We're active in the telecom sector. We have very, very great strengths in that. In the past, we have had Canadian aircraft flying here, and I'm confident that we will have in the future. So we're starting to focus a lot on the clean tech sector, on renewable energy. If the mining sector opens up here with the new mining code, Canadian companies dominate across West Africa. If you look at Senegal, Mali, Burkina, Niger, it's Canadian companies which are the largest investors across all those companies. And so if Cameroon opens up, you'd expect to see a high level of interest from Canada.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, Your Excellency, can you talk to us a little bit? I know IDRC tends to be involved in Cameroon. What is the overall engagement, even without a bilateral cooperation?
Okay, so let me, just in case people are not aware, let me explain a little bit about IDRC. So IDRC, which is the International Development Research Center, it's based in Ottawa. It was set up by the Canadian government, funded by the Canadian government, but managed at arm's length. And this is actually a model that we use a lot, where we set up independent, specialized organizations that the Canadian government funds, and then they take their own funding decisions. And as it happens, those, I think because of the ties that have been created over the years with Cameroon throughout when it existed, our bilateral assistance program, we end up with projects funded by these entities in Cameroon. It makes it very difficult for me to figure out what we're doing, because I often find out like at the last minute. So we have, in the health sector, we have an organization called Grand Challenges Canada, which you're familiar with, which funds health projects here. In gender equality, there's something called the Equality Fund, which it's a new entity, which I recently discovered is funding some women's NGOs here. IDRC, actually, I mean, it's been around for a long time. It has funded projects in Cameroon since, I think, starting in 1976. And its objective is to strengthen in developing countries, to strengthen the national domestic capacity for research, but applied research which will contribute to the development of the country, as well as which will have a kind of a longer term impact on strengthening the research capacity in the country. So as it happens, this morning I was at the École Normale Supérieure here in Yaoundé at the launch of an IDRC funded project, and this is just to give one example, and this is being run through Cameroon, but also with the counterpart École Normale Supérieure in Chad and CIR, and it's to focus on the training of primary school teachers, particularly primary school teachers who work in community schools, i.e. those teachers who are probably the least well trained traditionally and are working in the kind of the most isolated, most underprivileged areas. And this is, if I recall correctly, a 3-year project. And I think I've received IDRC's regional offices in Dakar, and we talked to them, but I think 4 times now, I think I've received invitations to the launching of projects, including one at the Nkafu Policy Institute last year, which IDRC in Dakar hadn't told me about. So I'd have to go back to them and say, hey, what's this project? And then they'd give me the background. And it's really, it gives me a lot of pleasure to see the extent to which Canada is active in this. When I say sector, it's the research sector. Each project has a different focus. Could be education, could be health. In the case of Nkafu Policy Institute, it was the startup sector, the social entrepreneurship sector. So,
well,
yeah.
Your Excellency, as mentioned earlier, we did receive many questions, more than 100 questions from folks when they registered, and we've compressed those questions in some of the conversations, the conversation that we've had. But there are still many questions now in the chat that I will pick a few to ask. Now they're still talking about how you see in general bilingualism in Cameroon in a 10 years time. This question comes from Robert Nantuan, Dr. Nantuan, who talked about how he was very impressed in Canada how bilingualism is done, and is interested in seeing in hearing what your views are regarding how it can be implemented in Cameroon. So I'll have you touch a little bit on that.
Okay, I'm gonna cheat at the outset by also kind of saying something that I wanted to say at the end of your last question. And one of the other initiatives that we fund here in Cameroon is something called AIMS, which is the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences. And this is a Pan-African network. There's I think 5 campuses, and Cameroon being one of them. And the principal objective there is to strengthen the African, not only Cameroonian, but African capacities in STEM, principally mathematics, but with a strong focus on women. Now, one of the interesting, I visited AIMS in Limbe a while back, and I'm going to come around to the bilingualism. One of the interesting things at AIMS is that so they have a mixture of students from Cameroon and from other African countries, because anybody who is accepted, it's free, and you can apply from anywhere in Africa. So you had a mix of Anglophone African and Francophone African, Anglophone Cameroonians, Francophone Cameroonians. And one of AIMS's objectives, apart from teaching people math and strengthening STEM capabilities, they say that everybody who graduates from AIMS has to graduate bilingual. So if you come in as an Anglophone, you have to learn French. Come in as Francophone, you have to learn English. And that, to me, it's one of the really good examples of that's kind of Cameroonian bilingualism at its best. More generally, I'll say, as a Canadian, when you come here, you don't quite know what to expect in terms of bilingualism. But overall, my reactions have always, I've been impressed quite positively. What I observe is that, particularly among younger Cameroonians are much more bilingual than their parents. And of course, there's this phenomenon where a lot of Francophone families send their kids to English school, and so they turn out bilingual. And in fact, often I'll ask young people, I'm not sure. I listen to them speaking English, French, and I ask, so are you Francophone or Anglophone? And the typical reaction I get is people kind of laugh a bit dismissively. In other words, kind of say, well, that's a dumb question, because it doesn't really matter. So there is this, I think, very positive growth of bilingualism starting among younger, urban, let's say better off Cameroonians, which I find very impressive. Today, when you have your interactions with government officials, if you go to government meetings, I'm struck by the level of bilingualism of ministers, and that they use both languages in their presentations and in their meetings. I'm tempted to say even more so than in Canada. Now, of course, in Canada, as here, there's a political imperative for, at the level of the federal government, for ministers to be bilingual and to use both languages. So there's a lot of positive signs, but of course, it's as we found in Canada, it's a long, slow process. And you know, we when the bilingualism commission here was set up, this was just before I arrived. They went to Canada on a study tour, and tell me that they learned a huge amount by talking to a variety of interlocutors in Canada, the Official Languages Commission and various ministers, and about how do you make bilingualism work? How do you make a country more bilingual? You know, we look forward in future to continuing that cooperation with the Bilingualism Commission, which I think has an important role to play over the medium to long term. And so I think the question was, how do I feel about bilingualism in Cameroon? And honestly, I have to say, I feel very positive. That's always the, I'm going to say always, or pretty much always, I come away from, let's say, bilingual encounters in Cameroon very impressed.
Well, there has been many questions, and there's still a lot of interest in Canada's support for the Swiss initiative. There is still that, which you've talked of. If I summarize you said you were moderately optimistic without having any illusions regarding the Swiss involvement. Now, there is a question from Ed Smith. Ed asked about, you know, you've mentioned a lot about the lack of a bilateral agreement between both countries. Do you envision, will you be a proponent for reinstituting one? I think we can have you touch briefly on that. That may be a yes or no. And then one of the other areas that Giselle Itambeng, oh, Giselle, nice seeing you. Giselle Itambeng, who is the CEO of Asafe in Douala, talks about humanitarian support for internally displaced in Douala, where she's based. Can you touch a little bit about if there is specific support that that you all are providing for that? And lastly, Your Excellency, I would have you also touch a little bit on the engagement regarding COVID-19 response for Cameroon.
Okay, on the, if I understood Ed's question, it was whether there's a likelihood that Canada would reinstate a bilateral assistance program, and I'm just going to say no. We've just announced just last year the launching of new bilateral assistance programs in modest sized in Niger and Chad, and that's partly as part of Canada's engagement on the Sahel and Sahel issues more broadly. And these are countries which, if you look at the development indicators, they are significantly worse off than Cameroon. So you know, on our focus, you know, our commitment on the bilateral side is on the assistance side is to direct our attention to the poorest of the poor. So I don't think Cameroon will make that cut again, but there's as I said, there are long-standing ties between Canada and Cameroon, and I see projects happening here which are funded through various other windows. So not the bilateral window, but sometimes the multilateral window, or what we call the partnership window, which is where Canadian organizations come to us looking for funding, and often on a regional basis. And what I see very often here is projects where Cameroon is one of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 countries that are included in a regional project. And I think Cameroon often gets included in those because of these ties that exist. You know, example, one of our most visible assistance aid budget funded organizations here, and one which I like very much, is CUSO International. And they work on climate change, they work on entrepreneurship, they work on gender equality. And CUSO has been working here for many years. We've recently funded them for a new project. And in pre-COVID days, and again, once the COVID thing is over, a lot of what they do is to bring Canadian co-operants to Cameroon to work on projects. Now, very creatively, because you can't bring people from Canada, they found Canadians here, and often Canadians of Cameroonian background, so it's perfect. We have two other projects like that. One of them, La Fondation Guérin-Lajoie, which has a project focused in the education sector. And a third one, which is its own organization called UPADI, Union des Producteurs Agricoles, based out of Quebec, and that's in the agriculture sector. And so and those last two projects both of them have started in the time that I have been here, so in the last year. So these are examples of new regional projects funded out of this partnership window where Cameroon is included. And I think we're going to keep seeing things like that. Another part of the commitment under our assistance policy is that minimum 50% of our assistance will go to sub-Saharan Africa. So that creates a lot of opportunities for Africa-based projects. So I think we'll continue to see support coming in here, but through these different windows or different organizations like IDRC and others. Second question was around.
Well, that was the second. The second question was regarding Canada's involvement in internally displaced individuals, some of which you've touched on already. And lastly, about the response to COVID, which I know Canada has been engaged in that.
Right. So I'll just say briefly on the IDPs. I think the focus to date has been on providing humanitarian support, within, and I'll just talk about Northwest Southwest here, within the Northwest Southwest. But I think there's a growing realization that of the challenges faced by IDP communities, let's say in the West or in the Littoral, and as well as by their host communities. So I'm expecting that we will see proposals coming to our humanitarian window in that regard. And I would say that generally we look sympathetically at projects that address that problem. So I'll give another example. We're funding this is another one of our big projects. It's with UNICEF in the education sector, and it's on inclusive education. So that's both doing girls' education and people with disabilities. And those projects have been deliberately located in the West and in the Littoral so that they can also capture IDP children. And so I think going forward, while we don't have a specific funding window for that particular challenge, I think going forward, you will see us looking more, considering with interest projects that fall into that kind of category. COVID, yeah, okay. COVID is an interesting one. So when after the pandemic emerged, Canada responded. One of the ways in which Canada responded, so bilaterally, was that they created something they called the crisis pool. That's just the name they gave it. And it was funding that was given to individual embassies, so including ourselves, to manage through an existing mechanism that we had in place, the Canada Fund. So it raised the ceilings, raised the size of the project, projects that we could fund, and kind of liberalized a bit the way we could work. Now, Cameroon, and I'm kind of proud to say this. Maybe it reflects how foolish we were, but we, when the money was being distributed, Cameroon was allocated more funding than any other embassy in sub-Saharan Africa. And then I put my hand up and said, that's not enough. Please send us more. And then later in the year, when there was some lapsing money, again, I put my hand up and said, we'll take that, thank you very much. So we ended up identifying, approving probably a minimum of 5 times the normal funding that we would have through that mechanism. And that was principally in Cameroon, but also in Chad, CAR, and Gabon. And we were able to, of course, you know, there was a sense of urgency. You had to move very quickly. And we funded, in some cases, we funded UN agencies, which we wouldn't normally do. But I mentioned the IOM, but they had the capacity to deliver on larger projects. We funded 2 projects with them. We funded some international NGOs, which we wouldn't normally do because Canada Fund is normally directed at local NGOs. And we funded both International Rescue Committee in the far north and Norwegian Refugee Council in the northwest, southwest. And we funded a whole range of local NGOs, and we had a very large geographic spread. So we funded NGOs in the far north, in the east, in the northwest and southwest. We funded one NGO working with sex workers here in Yaoundé, and I bet government wasn't looking at, you know, how to mitigate the risks of COVID-19 among sex workers, but we found an extremely good local NGO came to us with a very good proposal, which we went ahead with. So now, in addition to that, we also, through a completely different mechanism, we delivered some very high-tech analytical equipment to the Laboratoire National pour la Santé Publique, so National Laboratory for Public Health. And this was based on a kind of a nuclear technology. And when we visited them, they told us that it was really quite unique equipment that they were able to use and will continue to be able to use for diagnostic purposes. So that was an interesting period. Now that funding is all exhausted now, and so we're praying there's not a third wave. But so far so good. But we were, I think we were very proud of what we were able to do, but also very impressed by the local organizations that came forward to us with ideas.
Well, you know, Your Excellency, we unfortunately have run out of time. You know, it has gone by, you know, too quickly for our liking. But you know, that's what happens when there is just a lot of ground to cover. Now, being cognizant of your time, could you give us some closing remarks regarding, you know, all the major challenges that, you know, you see the country going through, you know, the issues of human rights, and I see Maximilian put some comments there on human rights and the challenges that we face, the issues of governance, the issues of many folks talk about elections and the fact that there is no agreement, there is no common playing field on that, and you have the issue of Northwest and Southwest, which many go as far as looking at it as a very existential threat for the country. Given all of this and given your 18 months or your 2 years currently in the country, where do you think we are going, and what will be some parting words of wisdom that you can give us?
So I've seen a tremendous number of good things here in this country, and meet lots of people with absolutely the best intentions, so I guess I fundamentally believe that there is a great capacity here in Cameroon to address the problems that it faces. As a Canadian, and I do stress that as a Canadian, when we look at Cameroon, a country with which we have so much in common, we can't help but look at it through our own kind of federalist DNA. You know, in Canada, we have a highly decentralized system of governance, which and I want to stress it's a living being. It's not a fixed system which has been designed to work in a particular way and you follow the rules of that design. It's a living thing which continually evolves, and part of that evolution is constant disagreement between the different levels of government, and but that's okay. That's what we live with, and that's how Canada has, I think, to a remarkable degree, succeeded as a country, and as a country we have managed to accommodate regional differences, linguistic and cultural differences. We've managed to accommodate that so far quite successfully, that although with some real bumps along the road in the past, but we've managed to accommodate the aspirations of a linguistic and cultural minority that perceives itself to be a minority that is discriminated against. Choose your words. And so when we look at Cameroon's DNA, we see that there is this very centralizing reflex in Cameroon, and sometimes that centralizing reflex can be very effective, but there's other times when it's counterproductive and you have to change. And actually the pandemic was, I think, a really different example, because you saw that because of the nature of the pandemic, MinSanté had to, and I give them credit for this, they had to quite quickly decentralize testing capacity, empower the regional health delegates, and you saw that there was this real dialogue taking place between the Ministry of Health at the national level and the regional units, so the Délégué Régional de la Santé. Now, Cameroon is embarking on this decentralization exercise, which I don't think it's unfair to say that it has to date moved a bit more slowly than people would like. And when I say people, I mean the people in the regions. And I think it's my sense that the central government recognizes that. Some say that this decentralization doesn't go far enough. I guess my comment on that would be, remember that once you create, this is the Canadian experience, once you create a decentralized process, it becomes a living being, and it may look like, it may have a certain shape today, but the pressures inherent in that system will lead that the shape of the decentralization to evolve. And so I'm not one who, while I remain skeptical that the decentralization as it has been executed to date is having an immediate impact on people's perceptions, I do think that there is a potential in that process to change the way the Cameroon system of governance, to change the way it works in a way that will work better for the constituent parts. And as I say, in everything I've seen, Cameroonians are smart, capable people, and so I think they have the capacity to make that that process worked. So if I have yeah, parting words, it's leap of faith, going back to our earlier discussions, and engage in that long, slow, but ultimately positive process of evolving the DNA of governance, so that decentralization, so that the potential of decentralization can be maximized.
Your Excellency.
And I speak I speak from my Canadian experience. I mean, sometimes Cameroonians say to me, well, outsiders will always bring their own views to the table, and it's true. I mean, we can't help but speak from our own experience. So,
Your Excellency, this conversation could go on for another hour for sure, but really want to use this opportunity to thank you for making yourself available for this very expansive conversation on Canada-Cameroon relations. We remain very pleased with the degree of engagement from the High Commission and the Canadian government in the country and all its constituent parts. We are hopeful that you would continue to make yourself available for further conversations, and hopefully, especially before your term runs out, we hope to have further conversations with you. Want to thank you and your team for working closely in making this possible. Also want to give a good shout out to our team, Santa, Tala, Ansel, Free, everyone who has worked hard to make this possible and make this run very well. Your Excellency, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone who joined us and everyone who contributed to this being a very successful conversation. Thank you.
And thank you for the opportunity, Dennis. Look forward to speaking more.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Goodbye to all. Thank you.